Deb Ashell rang my house on a Thursday in December and said, "Danny, don't say anything. Just listen." No one knew she made that call. Not then, and not since. She's answered the phone at that county office since 1996. She was there before me and she's still there now. And in 29 years, I never once heard her raise her voice or repeat a thing she'd been told. She said, "There's a report on you." I said, "On me?" She said, "I haven't read it to you," and we never spoke. Then she hung up, and I stood in my own kitchen at 4:20, with the phone still in my hand and the yard light coming on outside. 29 years I made calls like that one. I never got one. If you're still with me, subscribe to True Seat Stories and put in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'd like to know. Now I've got to tell you about my sister, because the ground was hers. Oksana was 4 years older than me, and the only person alive who called me Bodan. Everybody else in this county has called me Danny since about 1960. She wouldn't do it. She said our mother didn't stand on a boat for 11 days, so a man in Nebraska could be called Danny. She died last March. 74. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. That one's mine. I'd do it again, and it has cost me more than anything else in my life. Here's what happened. In 2009, a call came into our office about our mother. Oksana had her at home and had had her at home 4 years. Alone. Nobody had offered her 1 hour of help, and she'd never asked, because in our family you don't. I didn't take that call and I didn't screen it. I was the supervisor. What I did was sign the finding at the bottom of the page. Neglect. Substantiated. Against my own sister, in a box with my initials in it. And I was right. That's the part people want me to soften, and I won't do it. Our mother was in the back bedroom with a pressure sore that had gone through to what those go through to. Somebody had to write it down. The somebody was me. Oksana never spoke to me again. 15 years, 11 miles up the county road. I saw her truck at the elevator. I saw her at 2 funerals and a wedding. She died in March and left me the ground. 240 acres, because there wasn't anybody else. There was no letter. Her lawyer had a note in the file. It said he'll know what to do with it. I've had a year with those 7 words. I can make them mean forgiveness before breakfast and the opposite by supper. Terry moved home in 2023 after his divorce with Ivy. Terry's my son, 44. Ivy was 9 then and she's 11 now. She reads at the table, which drove her grandmother mad and delights me. He married Shelby the next spring and she came too. Shelby's 41. She did 15 years in home health before Terry. Bathing people. Cooking for people. Sitting up with people at 3 in the morning. That's hard work and it's badly paid. I respected it. I said so, and I meant it. It's also where she learned exactly what a report can do and precisely who reads one. For about 8 months, it was good. I've got 4 bedrooms and a wife dead in this house since 2018, and there was a child in it again doing homework at my table. Then in November, she started in about the stairs. Nothing you could hold. Have you thought about the stairs, Bodan? My mother had a fall on stairs like those. There's places now that aren't like they used to be. I said the stairs were fine. I took them slow twice that month. My hip goes in the cold and has since I came off a hay rack in 1981. It goes in November and comes back in April, and it's done that 43 years. She wrote it down. Not that night, but she wrote it down. Every true thing about a 70-year-old is evidence, if you put it in the right order. Then Deb rang, and I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. Here's what I did next, and I want you to notice how small it is. I sat at that table with a legal pad and wrote out the 12 screening questions in the order intake asks them. From memory, I wrote 4 of them. Then I answered them out loud, in my own kitchen, to nobody. Do you have enough food in the house? Do you know today's date? Who manages your money? Has anybody hurt you? Are you afraid of anyone you live with? That last one's question 9. I sat in a cold kitchen a while before I answered it. Then I put the pad in the gun safe, because a legal pad on a table is a document, and I've spent my life explaining to people what a document is. Next morning I asked the county for my own file. You can do that. That's the whole thing. That's the entire piece of knowledge this story turns on, and almost nobody has it. People hear anonymous and think it means nobody wrote it down. It means your name won't be read out to the person you called about. It doesn't mean the field is empty. There's a number on that field and a clerk fills it in. And if you're the subject of a report, you can ask for your own file. They have to give it to you. I told 200 people that over 29 years. Not one of them ever did it. They'd nod and they'd go home. And they'd never ask, because when you're frightened, the last thing you'll do is walk into a county office and put your name on a form. It took 11 days. I picked it up in person from a woman at the front counter who wasn't Deb, because I didn't want Deb anywhere near it. Report received the 4th of December, 16 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. Concerns: unsafe living conditions, possible self-neglect, possible financial exploitation by an unnamed third party. That last one told me everything. Financial exploitation by an unnamed third party. Somebody had put in writing that a stranger might be taking my money, so a judge would have a reason to hand it to a family member instead. You don't write that sentence by accident. You write it because you know what it unlocks. And the reporter field was not blank. There was a name in it, Shelby Danilchuk. And there was a telephone number, and it was the one that rings on the counter in my own kitchen when the school calls about Ivy. I read that page in the truck, in the county lot with the heater running, which is where I seem to read everything now. Then I drove home and had supper with them, and she'd made the thing with the sausage and the cabbage that her mother makes, and I said it was good, and it was good. 2 days after that, I heard her say it out loud. There's a header in the machine shed. I've been meaning to sell it since 2021. It's up on blocks with the reel off, and if you're on the far side of it with a light, you cannot be seen from the door. And I was under there with a wrench because the guard had come loose. They came in about 4. I heard the pickup, and then I heard both of them. Terry was worried. You could hear it. He kept saying the same 3 words in different orders, which is what he does. And what he was saying was that his father wasn't stupid. And she said, he isn't going to fight it. And even if he does, who do you think a judge is going to believe about an old man on a farm? Then she said something about the drive to Grand Island, and they went back out. I stayed under that header a while. I've been in maybe 400 houses in this county. I've sat at kitchen tables with women who couldn't tell me the year, with men who could give me the price of corn in 1974 and not their own daughter's name. Every time, the first thing I did was work out which one was in front of me. That is the entire skill. It is the only thing I was ever good at. And my daughter-in-law had gone through the same door as those women and looked at me and made her assessment. And she'd made it in about 8 months. And she'd got it wrong in the one direction that was going to cost her everything. I put the wrench in the box and shut the shed and went in and washed my hands and ate supper with them. Ivy had a spelling test on the Friday. We went through the list twice at the table. That's the part I'd want you to sit with, if you sit with any of it. Not the report and not the petition. The 10 weeks of spelling tests. I made her toast in the mornings. I ran her to school when the road was bad. In February, I drove 40 miles to a wrestling meet in Aurora and sat on a plank bench next to the woman who had written down that I could not look after myself, and we shared a bag of popcorn, and she asked after my hip. I said it was better. It was. It always is by February. She said, that's good. And she meant it, or she meant something, and I have stopped trying to sort out which. Ivy won her weight class. We all three stood up. I want to be exact about the 10 weeks that followed, because they're the whole story. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell Terry. I didn't tell Ivy one thing. I made a single phone call to Ruth Ann Cole, who trained under me in '99 and runs intake now. I said, "Don't do anything, don't tell me anything, and don't put my name in your mouth in that building. I want to ask you a favor, and it's a big one," she said. "Go on then." I said, "When a visit gets scheduled on me, I want you sitting at my table when it happens." There was a long pause on that phone. Then she said, "Danny, do you understand what you're asking me to be part of?" I said, "I'm asking you to drink a cup of coffee in a warm kitchen with a competent man and then write down what you saw." "That's the whole favor." She said, "When?" I said, "I don't know. But somebody's coming, and they won't ring first, and I'd like there to be 4 people in that room instead of 2. She came out on the 11th of January, and again on the 18th, and again on the 22nd. She brought a thermos every time and sat where my wife used to sit, and we talked about her boys wrestling and the price of beans. Kendra Vosberg knocked on my door at 9:10 on the morning of the 29th. She's 38. She had a folder and a lanyard and one of those coats you get in a county office. She was pleasant, and she did the thing I taught people to do, which is look past whoever answers the door at the room behind them. I let her look. The house was 71 degrees, because I'd had the furnace serviced in October. There was food in the refrigerator, and food in the freezer, and a hot dinner in a pot on the stove. And Ruth Ann Cole was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of her. Vosberg stopped in the doorway when she saw her. About a second and a half. I've thought about that second and a half more than most things since. She sat down and went through her questions, and I answered every one the way I've taught 200 people to answer them. Plainly, without arguing, without making a single joke. "Do you know today's date?" I said, "The 29th of January. Who manages your money?" I said, "I do. At this table on the 1st of the month, and would you like to see the book?" She said that wouldn't be necessary. "Are you afraid of anyone you live with?" I said no. That was true on the 29th of January, and it's true now, and I've turned that answer over more than anything else I said that winter. She was in my house. 50 minutes. Ruth Ann sat there the whole time and said almost nothing. When Vosberg left, Ruth Ann washed her cup and set it upside down on the rack and went out and wrote her own note before she turned the engine over. 9 days later, the write-up came through because I'd asked for everything, and everything means everything. Home cold. Little food evident. Subject vague as to date and finances. Third party present throughout, identity not established. Subject deferred to her repeatedly. Third party present throughout, identity not established. That woman ran county intake for 9 years. Her name is on the certification Vosberg holds. Her photograph is in that hallway. About 9 feet from the desk. Identity not established. I read it 4 times, then went out and started the pickup and let it run a while without going anywhere. Because up until that morning there was a version of this where Shelby had panicked, where she'd looked at an old man on a stair and a lot of ground and talked herself into something over 6 weeks. That version needs the county to be honest and wrong. The county wasn't wrong. The county was bought. Vosberg sat in a warm house with a full refrigerator and a retired supervisor and a woman whose photograph is on the wall of her own office. Then she went back and typed cold and vague and identity not established. Nobody types that by mistake. You type it because somebody's told you what the page needs to say. I found out later what it was worth. $400. $400 to write down that a man can't look after himself. The petition was filed in the 2nd week of February. Guardianship of the person and of the estate. That means the person and the money, which means all of it. Filed by Terry because it has to be family. with a lawyer's address in Grand Island. My son's name was on the top of that petition. He drove her to the county office on the 4th of December. He sat in the lot 40 minutes with the engine running. Then he drove her home and ate at my table that night. He did that for 10 more weeks. I'll say one thing about Terry and then leave him alone till the end. He isn't a hard man. He's never in his life been a hard man. He married a woman who's certain about things, and certainty is a kind of gravity if you've spent your whole life being unsure. That's an explanation. It isn't a defense, and he has never once offered it as one. In February, we hauled the last bin of corn. Terry drives that truck. He drives it because it's his. I sold it to him for $1 in 2019, so it'd be his name on the title and his insurance on the policy. That's the entire reason. It was just as true when I was 65 and putting 400 acres through it. It's paperwork. That's the joke of the whole winter. Neither of us has ever said it out loud. 22 miles to the elevator at Kalina Bend. 9 degrees. I rode over with the tickets on my knee. He tarped it, and I checked the strap on my side the way I've checked it since he was 14. At the scale, I got out and stood where I've stood since I was a boy, watching the ticket come up out of the machine. He said tarp once, and I said, got it. That was the whole conversation, 44 miles. I already had my file. He didn't know that yet. He has hauled my corn every winter since his mother died, and never once let me take the fuel off him. I can't get those two to sit together, and I've stopped trying. Both of them are my son. Ruth Ann took the whole thing to the county attorney on the 19th of February. Not to the office. Not to Vosberg's supervisor. To the county attorney, because she isn't a fool, and because a report with her own name in it as an unidentified third party is the kind of document a career ends on if it's handled quietly. She had her note. She had the dates of her 3 earlier visits. She had the furnace service receipt from October. I hadn't thought to keep that. It was in a drawer, because my wife kept every receipt for 31 years, and I have never emptied that drawer. And I had my own file, with a name in the reporter field and a telephone number that rings on my kitchen counter. The petition was dismissed on the 28th of February. No hearing. It never reached a courtroom. A guardianship needs a finding under it, and there wasn't one. When the county attorney's office rang Grand Island, the lawyer withdrew inside a day. That's the whole legal event. It took 11 minutes of somebody's afternoon. Nobody was ever arrested. I want to be plain about that. There were no charges, and there was never going to be. What happened instead is worse for them, and it lasts longer. Kendra Vosberg lost her certification in April, not for lying. For a home visit write-up that 4 people who were in that kitchen describe a different way, and one of those 4 ran the unit that certifies her. She got a hearing, which is more than she gave me, and she will not hold that certification again in this state. She is 38 years old. It's the only thing she's trained to do. And Shelby is named in the record as the reporter. That's what finished her, and nobody handed it down. It's just what a record does. 15 years in home health. Every one of those jobs runs a check. What comes up now is a false report filed against an elderly person in a house she was living in. There's no agency in this state that'll put her in a room with somebody's grandmother again. Not one. It doesn't come off, and it doesn't expire, and she's 41 years old. She came out in April to the machine shed because I didn't go to her. I was up on the header with a grease gun, and I heard the car, and I didn't come down. She stood in the doorway with the light behind her, and I kept working, and that's how the whole thing went. 20 minutes. Me on a machine, her on a concrete floor. She said, I want to know what you told them about Terry. I said, the truth, that he drove you and waited outside. She said, that's it? I said, that's all I know. That's all anybody asked me, and that's all I said. She stood there a while. Then she said the thing she'd driven out to say, which was that Terry would come round, and that Ivy would understand it when she was older, and that none of this had to be permanent. I didn't answer any of that. Then she asked me a question she shouldn't have asked, and I've thought since that she asked it because she needed one thing that afternoon: to have gone her way. She said, "That woman who was here in January, sitting at your table, was that a friend of yours?" I put the grease gun down and came off the header. "Because you don't say this from up a machine," I said. "Her name's Ruth Ann Cole. She ran intake in this county for 9 years. Her signature is on the certification. Kendra Vosberg was carrying in that folder, and her photograph is on the wall, about 9 feet from the desk your report was typed at." I said, "She'd been out here 3 times before that morning, the 11th, the 18th, the 22nd. I asked her the first week of December. About an hour after I put the phone down, I said, 'That visit didn't happen to me, Shelby.' I set the table for it. She didn't cry, and she didn't raise her voice. She stood on a concrete floor in a cold shed, and I watched a woman take 4 months apart and put them back together in the right order. That's a thing I've watched people do, across a desk maybe 40 times, and never once from 6 feet away. The stares in November, the dinners, every careful question about who managed the money. 10 weeks of handling an old man she'd decided was mostly gone, and the whole of it there was a legal pad in a gun safe and a retired supervisor coming out on Thursdays with a thermos. Not one day of it went the way she thought it had. She'd had the feeling of being ahead, which isn't the same as being ahead. Then she said, "You could have stopped it in December." I said, "I know. I've been up at 4 in the morning with that most nights since, and I expect to go on being." She went out to the car. She didn't say anything else, and she didn't look back at the shed, and I stood in the doorway till she was past the Coulterman place. That's the last time she's been on this ground. He isn't going to fight it, and even if he does, who do you think a judge is going to believe about an old man on a farm? She said that in this shed in December, to my son, with me the other side of the header where neither of them could see me. I've had a year with that sentence. The answer turned out to be that no judge was ever asked. A county attorney read 4 pages on the 19th of February, and a lawyer in Grand Island withdrew inside a day. And nobody ever put me on a stand and asked me what day it was. But that isn't the part I'd say back to her, if you got to say things back. What I'd say is she had it exactly right and it still didn't help her. She was right that a judge would have believed a form over me. That's true. That's why the form works, and it's why I spent 29 years being careful with them. A man my age, on his own, 300 yards off a county road, against a page with a county seal on it, the page wins. It wins every time, and it should frighten you. She just never worked out that the page has a name on it. Terry found out on the 2nd of March what I'd known since the 11th of December. He came out to the shed and stood where his wife stood 6 weeks later, and he asked me straight whether I'd known the whole time, and I said yes, since the 2nd week. He cried for about 90 seconds, and then went back to work, and neither of us has said one word about it since, and I don't expect we ever will. He's still here. He's in the trailer on the home place now, and Ivy's with him week on, week off. The ground's still in my name. 240 acres of my sister's dirt that came to me from a woman who wouldn't speak to me for 15 years because I once put my initials in a box on a form exactly like the one they filed against me. I've had a year and a half to work out what she meant by, "He'll know what to do with it," and I'm no closer than I was in that lawyer's office. But I know what I did with it this spring, which was put it in a trust with Ivy's name in it, and Terry as the trustee. I had the papers drawn by a woman in Grand Island who's never met any of us. Terry signed it at my kitchen table with his hands shaking. He said, "After what I did it and couldn't finish it, I said, I know what you did. Sign it. In April, I put a new lock on the granary. My father carried the old one over from Ukraine in his coat pocket in 1949. It hung on that hasp my whole life. The shackle sprang in 98 and never closed right again, and he was dead by then, and I left it hanging there, locked around nothing, and put a chain on the door. The new one came from the co-op and cost $9. I hung it on the same hasp, next to the old one. Both of them are on there now. The old one holds nothing and never will again. The new one does the work. There's no version of this where I take the old one off. Anybody who walks up to that door asks why there are two locks on it. Ivy asked me in May. She's 11. I said one of them was my father's and it doesn't work, and one of them's mine and it does. She said, why not just keep the one that works? I didn't have an answer for her that afternoon. I've got one now. Because you can see where the one stops and the other starts. In 80 years, somebody will stand at that door and count two locks, and something happened here. Here's the part of it that belongs to you. They always need one official to write the sentence down. That's the whole of it. A family can want your house and talk about it at your own table for a year, and none of it moves an inch until somebody with a license puts it on a form. And that same sentence is what finishes them. Every single time. Because it has their name on it, and a name on a form does not come off. That's what happened here. Not 1 acre moved. The woman who typed it doesn't have a career, and the woman who called it in will be explaining that call in job interviews for the rest of her working life. I got it back, all of it, without ever standing in a courtroom. So when somebody tells you a report about you was anonymous, hear what that word is doing. Anonymous never means nobody wrote it down. It means the name won't be read out to you. It's sitting in a field on a form with a number on it, and if you're the subject, you can ask for your own file, and they have to hand it over. Ask. In writing with your name on it. This week, if any of this is near you. It costs nothing, and it takes about 11 days. I told 200 frightened people that over 29 years, and I don't believe one of them ever did it. I'd like one of you to be the first. Write and tell me if you do it, and tell me what came back, and I will read every one of those. My sister never asked for her file either. I've thought about that more than I've thought about anything else in this story, and it is the one part of it I cannot put a lock on. If this one stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe to True Deceit Stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. There'll be another next week.